Hey, hello everyone. How are you doing this evening? Good evening to you, and welcome to this wonderful, fantastic masterclass. Every Thursday we do everything we can to provide you some great informational session where you get to not just network with one another, but you also get to network with great people and you get to learn from our speakers as well. My name is Aya Owaduni. I'm really, really fired up and excited to be here. Q-Tip was just on, and we had a meeting at the office earlier. I think it was last week or this week, and Q-Tip was cut off before he started rapping, but at least we got it to the first verse today. So to the DJ and everyone in the back end, I want to say thank you very much. Welcome everyone to this session. If you are here alive, please send a message. I would love to hear from you. How are you doing this wonderful Thursday evening? You can just give me one word, two words, great, fantastic, great food, too cold, whatever it might be, share with us. All right, I think some of the messages are coming in. Nobody told me that you're going to be writing in font too. Jeez. Okay, Socrates Jean-Louis, it's a pleasure. Welcome. Jane, good to have you here. Maria, great. Okbayami as well. It's good to see you. Ebony, Martin, Rhonda, thank you all very much for all your messages. I want to ask you another one before we move forward. I want you to just warm up your fingers because I need you to blow up the chat this evening. How was Be Future for you? Okay, throw that in there. How was Be Future for you? That was what, 5 weeks ago. It'll be good for us to hear some of your feedback on that. Great, wonderful, yeah, but whatever it might be. Okay, Socrates Jean-Louis, thank you for that message. Donovan as well says he is here. Ashton, greetings from Victoria, BC. Welcome. Maria says it was fire. Okay, me, thank you very much. It was a wonderful experience. So let me introduce myself as we get started. I am Aya Owaduni, and I am the Senior Manager, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion here at the Black Professionals in Tech Network. I handle a lot of the trainings that take place for many of our corporate clients. And yeah, I'm very, very excited to be here with you. I am currently located in Kitchener, Ontario, which is in the Waterloo region. It's about an hour and 20 minutes from Toronto. It's about an hour if you drive really fast on the 401, if you know what I'm talking about. But where are you located tonight? If you can just share some of your messages with us, it'll be great to know where you are right now, so at least we know where you're tuning in from. Before we get started with today's masterclass, okay, Jane is in Halifax, fantastic. Maria is in Pickering. Jay Spencer is in Toronto. Wonderful. If anyone is in Kitchener, let me know so we can grab some food, some suya together, and some other areas as well. Oh, we have someone from West Virginia here. Saskatchewan. I arrived in Canada 5 years ago, and I'm still trying to figure out how to say Saskatchewan. I feel like I want to cut my tongue off for that. I want to thank our partners who partner with us to make tonight a great to make this program successful. I know it's going to be successful. So please, I want us to give a big shout out to AWS. If you can just share, thank you AWS for being a partner with us on tonight's masterclass. Really want to say thank you to you. Really, really do appreciate it to have you here and to support us through this. Today's topic, we're going to be focused on cloud migration and cloud adoption. For some of us, we're like, yes, that makes a lot of sense. I'm ready to rock and roll. For some other people, it's like, what the heck are you talking about, Ayo? But regardless of where you are on that spectrum, I'm not going to tell you where I am, the latter, but regardless of where you are on that spectrum, this is a great opportunity for you to network. It's a great opportunity for you to learn. It's a great opportunity for you to connect with people as well. So I have some questions for you around cloud migration and cloud adoption. The first one, big shout out to Keisha in London, England. It's probably like midnight around your area. Hey, thank you for joining, and everybody else that is here. First question for you. Do you work with cloud migration, or are you just here to learn about it? Remember, I talked about that spectrum. Some of you already know what that is. And for some of us, we have no clue what all that is. But there is a likelihood that you are already using cloud migration in one form or another, whether personally or within your office space. Okay. So, are you here to learn, or are you here? Do you work in it, or do you learn it? So we have comments coming in. Okwayemi here says he's here to learn. Kyle or Keo, not sure how to say that. Apologies, says both. Soda here says, my company deploy our services on AWS. Fantastic. So it looks like, okay, Socrates says, I work with cloud migration. Larice says she's here to learn. Hi, Larice. It's good to see you here. Fantastic. Steven says, both. Fantastic. So regardless of where you are on that spectrum, our speaker and our panel, they're going to do the best that they can to pull you along in the conversation. Remember that you can drop your questions in the chat. You can click on submit your question, whatever it might be, to connect you on that. Question number 2, which cloud migration strategy do you prefer? Which cloud migration strategy do you prefer? This is when we start to separate those that know what they're talking about and those that have no clue what they're talking about. You know, someone said to me yesterday, I know athletics. And I was just like, wow. You know the person knows nothing about sports when they use the word athletics. So once again, which cloud migration strategy do you prefer, or are you familiar with? Is it the lift and shift? Is it the shift to software as a service, popularly known as SaaS? Is it application refactoring? Is it replatforming, or any other one that you know? I recently did my MBA in entrepreneurship, and we had a class in technology. And that was the only class that, look, all I have to do is pass a test, right? Okay, good, because I have no clue what's going on here. Okay, so Kyle, okay, thank you. It's Kyle, not Keel. Ebony says, Ebony Martin from the panel here, I work on cloud migration. Looking forward to chatting about it. Wonderful. Chris Franklin worked with deployment websites to AWS and connected to databases using AWS. Kyle says SaaS as well. Please keep the comments going here. It'll be great to hear from you which strategy that you prefer to use. I want to quickly jump to our agenda for tonight. If that can pull up in the screen now as we talk through our agenda. Fantastic. Thank you, backend crew. Really appreciate that. Welcome and housekeeping is what I'm currently doing right now. After that, our keynote presentation will be done by Jason Bennett. And then we're going to have a leadership panel as well. That will be moderated by Safi Mojidi. And after that, also networking will be taking place thereafter. Remember, as we talk about networking, please pop in the chat your LinkedIn link. I hope that's not tautology. Pop it in there so you can connect with other people and have those great networking conversations. Remember, you can find BPTN on social media. Instagram, we are BPTN. On Twitter, BPTN, that's our handle. If you're on LinkedIn, Black Professionals in Tech Network, type that in and boom, we will pop up. We are also on Slack. We have a large, fantastic community on Slack. We have some really amazing conversations. Recruiting takes place there. So if you're looking for great opportunities, you better join the Slack group. Facebook, we are BPTN. And on YouTube, BPTN Community. One thing I would love you to do for me immediately today is take a picture of your screen or of you in front of your laptop. I'm going to do that right now as I log on my phone, and go on Twitter and on Instagram, and please use the hashtag BPTN or BPTN Masterclass. Do you know why that is important? Because that gives other people, other Black professionals, colleagues, who don't know about BPTN, it's an opportunity for you to expose them to who we are, our mission, our vision, what we do, and they can become part of these great value-adding sessions as well. So please, let's ensure we do that. Okay, so some housekeeping rules that I have for you today. Remember to engage with peers and connect directly. We have a talent acquisition team from AWS here. They are recruiting. Be on your best behavior. type proper English. I'm just joking. But hey, share your messages on the chat. Let them know that you're here. Connect with them. Use the submit the question tab. You should be able to see that right next to the community chat. That way you can share your questions directly with with our panelists. And then remember, this session will be recorded. It will be provided on our website. You need to be registered to be able to get access to that information. You can resize your windows so you can either see the speakers larger or you can see the community chat. I was fine until you guys started chatting. I couldn't see anything. I got to put on my glasses. If you need to make that bigger. But if at any point you mess up and you can't find someone speaking or the chat anymore, all you have to do is click the restore button. If you see it, it's a little orange circle just in the bottom of the screen. You should be able to see it. It looks like what is on the screen right now. And then make sure to click all of the icons at the bottom if you want to get more information on our speakers, our BPTN social media links, our slide deck that is also being used today. Okay, let's move over to the next slide because I believe we wanted to point out the names. Yes, fantastic. We have our talent acquisition reps here from AWS. Reach out to them and have a conversation. Adele Gonzalez, senior recruiter. Adele, please, if you can just say hello in the chat so people know you. Michael Dixon as well, and Michael Hoggard. You can reach out to them on LinkedIn as well. Hey, this is a great opportunity to connect with them. So please let us do it. At this point in time, I would like to hand over to our keynote speaker for this evening. Okay, so his name is Jason Bennett. Jason is the director of the US West area for AWS, is leading a talented team of customer-obsessed sales professionals. Jason is known for his track record of driving business growth and recognized as a collaborative and inclusive leader with a passion for hiring and developing the best talents. He's going to be providing some great nuggets for us this evening. Jason, it's a pleasure having you. Thanks for joining us this evening.
It is a pleasure to be here with you, AO. If I could, I'd take you with me everywhere. You can do an intro. It's fantastic. I really appreciate that. So thank you. Hey, I'm super excited to be having this conversation today. Thank you to the Black Professionals in Tech Network. Really excited for not just this group, but also to talk a bit around what it means to innovate in emerging territories of tech. So I'm going to probably spend the next 15 minutes kind of digging into the topic and giving folks some insight. I really appreciate the insight that AL shared up front, and it's clear that we got folks around a bunch of different areas and different levels of understanding of what cloud is, and so we'll kind of try to keep it light just to keep you all in the fold. So as AO mentioned, I'm the general manager for Amazon Web Services. I actually lead our sales, business development, and our go-to-market teams broadly in the Western U.S. I've spent the last 20 years or so in technology. I spent about the last dozen years or so specifically with AWS in a bunch of different roles. So a couple things we're going to walk through. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the journey, talking about my journey, which I think aligns pretty well back to this idea of cloud migrations. We'll talk a bit around why folks are actually migrating to the cloud, different types of companies. What does it actually mean to them? I'm going to leave you with just a few pieces of insight, some learnings to take, and then we'll get into the benefits. And lastly, I'll try to leave you with at least a few gems, some things that you could take away and actually digest. So first, I'm just going to spend a few minutes, and I'll tell you a bit about me. I'm going to tell you about my journey. So as I mentioned, I've spent about the last 20 years or so in technology, and I think everyone's journey is a little bit different. Mine is the same. So I actually started back in technology. This was back in the late 90s. And I built an IT support company. I did early work with a early stage VoIP. I wound up being a SQL DBA. I just knew I wanted to be a part of tech somehow, but I didn't really know how, and I didn't really know what that meant. And so even at that point, I kind of made a decision around thinking about my own growth. I started thinking about the ways that I actually wanted to develop and the experiences that I wanted to have in the next role. I'm sure most of the folks here probably do the same thing. I'll tell you what I learned over a period of time is that insight and me thinking about the experiences that I wanted actually really changed what I did next. And so I'll try to connect this back to AWS in a bit here. I'll tell you, the first roles that I had are really focused on developing tech and tech depth and breadth. That was really the focus for me. And I remember going into my first sales job. I went into sales. This was back in about 2002. And I did it because there were three things I really wanted to know. And I would say for every professional, these are actually pretty critical, irrespective of if you're in sales, engineering, operations, so forth. Those three things. I really wanted to develop customer empathy and understand needs, whether those were internal customers to an organization or externally. I wanted to make sure I understood how companies actually set strategy and how they made buying decisions. And also wanted to understand the intersection of technology direction and business decisions. Any technology decision, as we know, any technology direction is usually aligned back to a set of business principles or a place that an organization needs to go. There's drivers. But I got to tell you, by the time I got to about 2009, 2010, there was a lot more that I wanted. And one of the reasons why I wanted so much more is because I wanted to matter broadly. And when I say matter, what I really mean is I wanted to matter to a company, I wanted to matter to a customer, I wanted to matter to the customer's customer. And as I mentioned, I was in technology sales, I was focused on contract manufacturing. For those that don't know, that's like white box manufacturing, that's hardware. Not a whole lot of value in that, a great way to learn to engage with people and really find common ground. But if you're going to matter to someone's business, it means you're actually impacting the outcomes that they're delivering for their customers. And so I remember there were three things that I wanted to make sure I could align to, and that's what actually led me to AWS. The first one that you see here is becoming a trusted advisor. There's probably no statement that gets used more than becoming a trusted advisor. I want to be a trusted advisor to X. And I think the thing that's always resident in that is, as I mentioned, you have to matter to someone's business. And so you really have to be in an organization that can help with deliver an outcome that is just really unique and that matters to their bottom line, matters to their end customers. Secondarily, I wanted to make sure I could build a non-transactional trusted relationship. I wanted to make sure that I had a chance to really work with companies where the relationship we had wasn't just based on a widget, wasn't based on one interaction, but it was actually a relationship that could grow and maybe even last, not just years, but decades. And the last thing, I wanted to make sure that I had direct relevance to what a company delivered, to what they delivered. Now that actually led me to the cloud. And as you can imagine, we wound up doing a ton of engagements with startups early on, digital customers, digital companies. I'll talk in a bit about some of those companies and some of the big outcomes that got delivered in partnership with AWS. But I will tell you, after about a couple years, something really changed. And what changed is, I would say that cloud became more than just a interesting thing, and it really sort of grew beyond just a business buzzword. And you had lots of large enterprise companies thinking about what the shift to cloud and migration would mean to them. And I was actually stepped into a leadership role for the first time. This was about 9 years ago. And there were two reasons I did it. There were two things I really wanted to make sure that I could really understand and sort of develop around an experience and get some value from. And the first one was making sure that I could serve as a catalyst and an enabler of innovation. It turns out when a company wants to innovate, there's a lot of things that get in their way, and it's not just technology. So that was the first thing I wanted to make sure I had a chance to do, and that I could coach other people on doing that. And then, as I mentioned before, having a direct relevance to what a company delivers. Well, what's really valuable is when you have a direct relevance to how a company delivers. And so I really was given an opportunity to start thinking about how do we solve for a lot of the challenges inside of an organization in making the shift to cloud, or more directly around migration and modernization. And it turns out it really wasn't about just technology. In some ways, it was about all the changes that had to happen in their organization to be really successful. So I promise this is probably about, the next slide I'm going to show you is probably the most detailed slide. I'm going to walk through it really quickly just to set the bar for the folks in the bridge. When we say migration, what do we mean? I'm going to boil it down really simply. When we say migration, we generally mean a migration of infrastructure, of services, of applications or environments to another location. In this case, we're talking about the cloud. We're talking about AWS. And I can tell you there's a lot of reasons why customers are driving migrations, but I wanted to just spend some time walking through a few business drivers. Here's the first thing. Most companies that are migrating to the cloud, the first thing they'll tell you about are cost objectives. They actually did it to reduce their costs. Now, when you say reduce costs, it's reduce costs from what? They're probably reducing their costs from either their own data centers, their own hosting locations that they've been at previously. Now, that's usually the first reason, and it's a pretty good reason. Most companies that shift to the cloud and that move to AWS, there's anywhere between about 25 to 50% savings. So you can imagine really large enterprises have tens, hundreds of millions, sometimes $1 billion IT spends. You can imagine 25 to 50% savings is pretty interesting. But I tell you, the real reason why companies actually migrate and the real reason why they're thinking about cloud and what it means to their business has a lot more to do with I would say, the qualitative impact that has an impact on their end customers. They want to move faster. They want to transform the customer experiences for their end customers. They want to really deliver digital transformation, and they want to modernize their business. And they want to drive new innovations and new business models. And at some point, many of these companies realize they can't do that within their own four walls. And so that really becomes the starting point for cloud migration. So I'll give you a couple of examples here just to root this group on what do we mean in terms of transformation and migration to the cloud. These are, I actually mapped these out comparative to the last 10 years that I had at AWS. Most people on this bridge probably know a few of these names, but I'll be really quick and just share some of the really unique outcomes that were delivered because these companies made a decision about moving to the cloud. Netflix, it's funny, we all think about Netflix now as this, the leading internet entertainment system. There's 200 million plus paid memberships. And most people that use Netflix, almost all of them now, do so because they open up their enabled TV, their mobile device. But those of us that are old enough actually remember sending off for DVDs that you got in the mail. That was the way it used to work. And so they really, back in 2010, this is the first time they actually shared that they were leveraging AWS. And they did that to enable all of their customers to leverage content in real time. And so they now have 57 million customers across 50 different countries. And all of that infrastructure that they're running, how they make that work, that's actually on AWS. Another company that you see here back in 2012 when they launched was actually Lyft. And Lyft ultimately wound up they built their rideshare platform on top of AWS. And so they're one of the largest transportation networks in the United States and Canada now. So if you really start to think about what does cloud mean, if you're leveraging Netflix, if you're leveraging Lyft, those are running on top of AWS. But there's some really unique scenarios that are in play as well. If you think about what do we traditionally consider large-scale enterprise organizations, companies that have been around for decades. Comcast is a perfect example of this. So back in 2014, Comcast actually launched their X1 platform and Xfinity XFi, and that ran on top of AWS. So they chose AWS to accelerate their time to market and deliver cloud-native products. Those were things, if you recall, back in the day, you probably had that old school Comcast box, and that's how you switch the channels. Now you have this integrated experience that's both on your mobile, your tablet, as well as if you're just tuning in. And then you even think about some of the traditional industries like financial services or healthcare life sciences. Capital One really chose AWS, and this was about 4 years ago now, to reimagine banking. They chose AWS to reimagine banking. They actually created an online or a digital bank that's all on AWS. That embraces data analytics, microservices, AI, ML. These are really unique use cases that were really driven because of a decision to shift to cloud. And I'd say probably the most exciting one, at least for me here, and whether or not you know it or not, most of us have probably been impacted by this in some way, is Moderna. So Moderna actually selected AWS as its preferred cloud provider back in 2020, and they also used AWS to standardize for analytics and ML workloads. Well, so Moderna actually demonstrated the power of its cloud-based strategy when they had to quickly execute and deliver a solution, and obviously a vaccine for COVID-19. So by leveraging the cloud, they developed the vaccine, and they developed in 43 days compared to the standard 20 months. And its capacity to scale production globally was really assisted because they were leveraging the cloud. So these are just awesome examples of how companies are able to leverage the cloud to deliver some really meaningful results. And so I will tell you, I'll quickly go through some of the learnings across all of these companies, some of the things that I've seen that really drive organizations to make this shift. And the first one I'd say is each one of these companies, they had urgency in innovating on behalf of their customers. They had urgency and they were innovating. They were disrupting. In some cases, they were disrupting themselves. If you go back to Netflix as an example, if you recall back in 2010, there were no online services for you to grab video from. So they were disrupting themselves. A secondary component is they saw a need to be agile and to shift quickly based on changing needs. I think Moderna is a perfect example of this. Those changing needs. It could be because of their customers are changing, the requests and needs of their customers are changing. It also could be different market dynamics. Certainly none of us could prepare or were aware of what was going to happen in early 2020 as it related to COVID. And that changed the way a lot of organizations had to operate. And this brings me to the next point. Predicting the future is really hard. One reason why companies are making this shift and really thinking deeply about what does cloud mean to them? What does migration mean? It's because it's really hard to predict what you're going to need to support your business and to support your customers. Infrastructure needs, where are your customers going to be? What are the specific services? Where all big challenges that they realize they may not be great at predicting. And the last thing I would say is if you look at many organizations today, the reality is they're no longer operating within a single country. Many large companies they have global customers, and their global customers have global needs. And so I think I could speak back to all of those examples and say these are some of the things that really drove that change. I would tell you there's probably two other things you don't see on this slide that you would see pretty consistently. The first thing is it turns out sometimes technology can be an inhibitor inside of an organization. And sometimes in moving to the cloud, technology no longer becomes that inhibitor, and so it allows companies to really start to reassess processes, workflows. What are all the other things that are broken now because we can move so much faster? The last thing I would say is many organizations are thinking right now about how do we actually better impact and invest in our own people. And so one way that they're doing that is upskilling and enablement of their talent, of the people in their organization. And there's no bigger area of investment in terms of enablement and training than in cloud skills right now. And so that actually brings me to the last slide. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about a few gems, a few things to take with you. Well, the first one I would say is when companies move to the cloud and when they're migrating, one of the big things they're doing, the first thing they start with is not the technology. They start with their companies. The ones that are really successful, they start with their customers. And I would say it's good for you to start with your customer outcome and to work backwards from it. So a really simple way to think about this is if you're in an organization and you're trying to push that org to make a move to the cloud, or if you're considering it, one thing to really be aware of is what is the shift and how's that shift going to make your customers, your internal customers, or your external customers' lives better? You want to be able to answer that question without saying any acronyms, without having to call out specific technology services that you're going to. What's the impact you're going to drive for your end customer? The second thing I would say, and this is for everyone on the bridge, define training enablement for you. And if you're leading teams right now and you're thinking about cloud, define it for your teams as well. I will tell you, you will not be upset by investing in your own education and development, particularly as it relates to the cloud. I think that those are going to be skills that will obviously assist you for a long time to come. The last thing I would say is if you think about migrations and if you think about the move to cloud, irrespective of which cloud we're talking about, some of the biggest challenges are getting started. And so I'd say is don't let paralysis stop you before you start. If you're thinking about training enablement, if you're thinking about leveraging the cloud, the most important thing to do is to start. And we've got some great training resources. I'm actually happy to drop some of those in the chat window here. And if you're thinking about migration or adoption, and at some point it seems a little too complex, start by breaking it down into really easy steps. What are the small steps? What are the first steps that we have to take? And how do we start to learn over a period of time? So those are some of the big gems that I would land with you. And I'll leave you actually with a quote from the previous CEO of AWS, who's now the CEO of Amazon. This is actually something that he shared about a year and a half ago. The key to reinvention is the combination of building the right reinvention culture and then knowing what technology is available to you to make the reinvention change and using it. And so that's why I would say really focus on your own training and education and enablement, and then get started. So Ayo, I'm happy to hand it back to you, and I really appreciate you giving me the time with this crew.
Wow, that was absolutely fantastic, Jason. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom. I'm inspired by, there were some few phrases that you used in the onset around you wanted to matter broadly. And I like that. Not only was that something from internal, that you were able to just take action through that. So thanks for joining us, Jason. I really do appreciate it. Hey, I would love you in the chat if you can start to what is one thing that you learned from Jason's keynote presentation? If you can just drop that in the chat, and your thank you as well to Jason, I'm sure he would really be encouraged and would really, really appreciate it. So, what is one key area, one key aspect of his presentation that you learned? I took some notes over here, trying to be a good student, ensuring that I grabbed some things from this. But I thought this was absolutely fantastic, just sharing the importance of cloud migration. He was able to give us some organizations that we all know and we're all familiar with. I do remember those days of the DVDs being mailed to the house, and we thought that was innovation in those days. But look at where Netflix is now, and the benefits and how they were able to scale quickly and do some amazing things once the cloud migration has taken place. I really love the fact that he talked about how organizations that migrate can save costs. You're talking about 25 to 50% of savings. Imagine what that could do to the bottom line for the organization if you can save that amount of money in terms of your expenses. Okay, I'm loving the comments coming in. Wendy says, roadmap to matter to add value. Koya says, AWS connects us all together. Data and analytics is the future. I don't know who said this, it was much earlier on. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Bam! I like that. So at this point, we're going to be moving to our conversation with our panelists. And at this point, I would like if we can pull up Safi Mojidi here. He is going to be our moderator for the panel conversation. Safi is the head of information security at Folks Health. He is a cybersecurity doctoral candidate and a security practitioner with over 15 years in the information security industry. So I'm going to be handing it over to you, Safi, so you can introduce the rest of the panel and take it from here as well. Let's keep the chat going. Over to you, Safi.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Io. That was awesome, Jason. Really appreciated all your insights there. How's everyone doing? It's a great Thursday evening, afternoon for most of us. I am really excited to get this conversation going. We have a very knowledgeable and awesome panel for you all tonight. Let me go ahead and introduce our outstanding panelists. So first up is Stephanie Howard. Stephanie is the head of WWSO, BDSI sales and GTM at AWS. She is a transformational leader in the technology industry with experience ranging from customer relationship management, cloud and infrastructure, data, artificial intelligence, business intelligence solutions. I mean, what don't you do? Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, welcome. Thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to this conversation, and hello to the BPTN community out there. Looking forward to chatting.
Awesome. Great. Nice to have you, Stephanie. Next up, we're going to bring Ebony Martin up to the stage. Hey, Ebony, how are you?
Hey, Safi.
Hey, Ebony Martin is the Director of Operations and Service Delivery at the United Federation of Teachers. She is the youngest Black director in the union's 61-year history. So let's just stop and give a quick hand clap for that. Awesome. She's responsible for managing the UFT's cloud-based customer relationship management system and their membership database. So welcome, Ebony. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Safi. And it's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm looking forward to the discussion and the discussion with Stephanie as well. But BPTN, we're ready to get started.
Awesome. All right. Next up is Shamarke Aiden. Shamarke is part of the enterprise data architecture team at Freddie Mac and co-owns the enterprise data and multi-cloud strategy practice. How are you today, Shamarke?
I am doing well. Glad to be here, Safi, and glad to be here to partake in this panel. And I'm ready to get started.
Awesome. Well, your typical day involves working with internal stakeholders, solving technical architectural challenges, and really evaluating cloud-based technologies while working with vendors to realize your enterprise strategy. So really looking forward to hearing yours and the other panelists' takes on some of these questions we have. Awesome. Well, welcome, everyone. I can already tell this is going to be a great conversation. Let's go ahead and get started. For everyone tuning in, please remember you can use the chat box to submit any questions for the panelists in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get to them as time permits. So let's first start with a little icebreaker. this, we can just kind of go in a round robin. But the first question is, and I can go first. If someone would have told you in high school that you would be working in the cloud, what would you have said? So this is a really interesting question because I used to actually want to be an astronaut. So I probably would have said, I'm kind of in the right arena, right? I work in the cloud. I used to work for NASA. Basically the same as being an astronaut, right? No, maybe not. So let's see, Stephanie, you want to go first? What would your answer be?
Oh, gee, when I was in high school, if someone would have said that, or when I was younger, I probably would have laughed. I'd have been like, what is the cloud? Thinking that it was some type of a joke. So it would have just been a completely like random statement because it wasn't even like a thing when I was younger. The funny thing though is that I work on the sales, sort of business side of technology. And when I was in middle school, that was actually my predicted career from one of my 7th grade teachers, that I'd one day be in sales. So I don't know if that's because I talk a lot or if I'm super curious, but we got at least one thing right. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, Ebony, how about you?
Yeah, I kind of echo Stephanie. I probably would have said, I knew nothing about the cloud like growing up. And it's so interesting that I ended up working in that space or this space. But I probably would have said that I don't know how to fly. But, honestly, like the cloud has been around since the 90s. I only really found out about it through, my journey and my professional journey. But I think there was a bit of a curve in like the 2000s that like the cloud became more mainstream. And so it's technically now a part of our everyday lives. Like you don't have to like explain it so much, but like way back then, like no one knew what it was. So.
Exactly. Great. Very good point. Shamarke, how about you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I was that kid who asked a lot of questions, so I probably would have asked a ton of questions, and at the end I would have said, "Oh, cool. What can I do with it? Tell me what I can do with it." So I would have inquired a little bit more about it, and honestly, I would have just connected the dots because ultimately, the cloud is just network computers, and I had a PC at home, and I was familiar with the mainframe, so. Just connecting those dots and just finding out what I can do with it and how I can get started is probably my reaction.
Right. Awesome. Yeah. Right. What do they say? It's not the cloud. It's just someone else's computer. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and jump right into these questions. I'm really excited. So in you all's opinion, we can kind of just go round robin. What are some of the key trends that you think is currently affecting cloud adoption?
I can get started if you want.
Sure.
A lot of what I'm going to say probably is going to echo some of what Jason had said earlier, because just in working with customers, what we find is a lot of the biggest challenges to large organizations sort of adopting the cloud isn't so much the technology itself, but it's more really around people and culture. And there's just a few things that can get in the way of companies adopting the cloud. One is it's really important to have executive sponsorship. You really want your senior leadership team to sort of be completely bought in on the strategy and making sure that this is moving to the cloud as a priority for the company, that there's alignment and that it is truly sort of a priority. There's a clear expectation, strategy, et cetera, because when there is sort of that strategic direction from the senior LT, it's hard to sort of not move forward, if you will, because everything that you're doing is sort of working back to the goals of the leadership team, and then you're also, there's also a drive towards like a culture of transforming and moving to the cloud and so forth. I think to second that, a lot of the more successful orgs have a very aggressive top-down goal that forces the organization to move to the cloud a little bit faster than if they were to just try to sort of like organically make moves and so forth. So if you don't have that, that can be sort of a blocker as well. And then another point is just obviously the comments that were made earlier around just training and enablement. Depending on the background of resources within the company, everyone may not be trained and skilled on some of the more emerging technologies in the cloud and so forth. And that in and of itself can be a blocker to adoption and so forth. And then just the last point around sometimes organizations getting paralyzed with trying to do too much all at once. So there's really no need to like boil the ocean. It's really just important to sort of, again, have a clear goal and priority and just try to create strategies and goals, if you will, that really address sort of the short, mid, and long-term approach, if you will. And so a lot of what we do with customers is we try to go in and help them analyze and assess their portfolio and start really helping to make recommendations around how to make moves that address both, short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. And sometimes just getting started helps companies, realize, realize what can move and can't move, and then it helps to you learn as you go, and you ultimately sort of get where you're trying to go. So just really, executive sponsorship, not having that can be a laggard, not having the right training and skills can be a laggard, and just, getting paralyzed with trying to do too much all at once.
That's great feedback. Where were you about 8 years ago when I was lifting and shifting applications from NASA into AWS? So we could have used some of that great feedback and insight. Ebony or Shamarka, do you all want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess I can talk a little bit about this, and this definitely hits home because I kind of work in, I worked to support a cloud-based team here at the United Federation of Teachers, and so I've been a part of like 11 enterprise-wide cloud-based migrations and implementations, and it's been a wild ride. But I'll start with, I have about 5 things off the top of my head, but I'll start with like one of the biggest factors that I feel like might be driving people towards the cloud, right? And I think Jason talked about it, and I put it on my list, which was business agility, right? And the simple truth is, the world that we live in now, especially given the last 2 years, there's like this forced change, right? In terms of the way that we work, the way that we live, and the things that we need that are kind of creating a demand for the cloud, if you will. And I can relate this to, I guess, my experience because, of course, throughout my professional career here at the U of T, we had to make certain decisions about migration to the cloud. And luckily, we did it before COVID hit, right? And so we migrated certain business functions proactively. I think our senior leadership team was great about that 2 years earlier before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, right? And we shifted our phone system that was like about 20 years old to a cloud-based phone system, literally months before the pandemic hit. And had we not done that, I think we would have been in a really sticky place in terms of, us as an organization. But I will say this, the 5 that come to mind is increased use of productivity tools, right? And when I talked about mainstream access to the cloud and the ways that it's been a part of our daily lives, we're talking Google, right? We're talking access to your email, access to productivity tools that make your life better, and cloud data storage. The shift away from brick and mortar into digital sales, that was a big thing during COVID, that I think that it basically created a demand for a lot of organizations to shift to the cloud, either if they were ready for it or not, right? You had to get there if you wanted to stay in business. Healthcare and the human resources, now I guess, kind of called people operations, and the ability to want to know, individuals' productivity at all times. And then the last one that comes to mind, it's one that hits home with my organization, and it's infrastructure as a service, right? And how do we automate as much as possible to make sure that our development teams are sticking to net new innovative development, right? So they're not worried about, daily operations. But yeah, that's what I would say. Those are some big trends.
That's a great point. I think everyone, we start to hear DevSecOps a lot, right? And I think that's one of the things you kind of hit on from the security perspective, standardization, optimization, automation. Those are words that we love, right? So you're definitely speaking my language with that. Shamarka, did you want to add anything, or do you want to, maybe we can hop to the next one?
So I'm going to talk about, some of the ones that I really like, the trends, and I want to see developed, specifically, the separation of compute and storage. We always talk about cost savings in the cloud, and the reality is that if you're not able to separate the compute and the cost, right, you have servers and you compute cycles running, and you're paying for those costs. So I'm really liking the development of the various solutions that enable you to separate those two. And just looking at the SaaS landscape, one of the most interesting developments is this, vendors developing solutions that abstract away the need for you to manage multi-cloud environment because they're doing it on your behalf. Especially coming from the data space, it's really amazing to see some of the databases as a service that are able to allow you to deploy your nodes and your clusters across GCP, Azure, AWS, and just having that flexibility and that abstraction, I think is really cool. And I think there's more work to be done in that area, but I think that's definitely a great trend.
Those are all great points. You kind of jumped the gun a little bit on some of the questions we're going to get into in terms of hybrid cloud, multi-cloud strategies. So let's go into one of those questions. So maybe Shamarka, we'll go right back to you. So what are some of the different types of cloud migrations that you've seen, and what is your most preferred?
So if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I'll probably tell you re-architect is the best strategy. But, today, being in the position that I am, right, my preference is retire, right? And the reality is you can't retire everything. So you have to retain certain things. And when you retain, it really depends on the size of enterprise you are in terms of what you do and the complexity of your deployments and your services and your business capabilities. So really, there's no one size fits all. In Freddie Mac, we have, you name it, right? We have everything, right? So all strategies we're employing in terms of, the certain services, we are re-architecting certain services, we are doing a lift and shift on certain services we're re-platforming, a set of capabilities, we are, acquiring by leveraging SaaS solutions. So there's no real one size fits all type of situation where your preference is really dictated by your need. And so, it depends on the situation. I like the path of least resistance, but that allows us to have a long-term vision and long-term runway for the business, for our users, for our customers, so that we're not really stuck, having to do all of these, migrations all over again and having to deal with the resourcing challenge that comes with being stagnant, right? So that's my answer.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. All good points. Ebony, in your 11 or so, I think that's the number you used, migrations and implementations, what would you say your preference would be?
No, that's tough, right? Because some of them were challenging, but also fun. Migrations that honestly increase productivity for an organization are super paramount, right? And sometimes those can be the most fun because it's really functionality that your organization needs. And so, off the top of my head, overarching migrating business critical applications to the cloud was definitely my favorite and continues to be my favorite because I'm constantly doing that now. But in terms of what I've done at my current organization, I've implemented 2 CRMs, and customer relationship management systems are always fun because, again, they get a lot of use for an organization. I also implemented OpenCTI, which also, again, can be fun, especially if you're connecting it to a CRM, either for the first time or, you've done it before. ECMs, it's not as, I would say, sexy, but ECMs are super, super important, especially if you plan on having an enterprise-wide document management strategy. Bulk mail, of course. SMS, I actually liked a lot. And then, of course, you've got, like I said before, Safi, those business critical applications and migrating that to the cloud. In my master's degree studies and in my organization, I think learning more about, the opportunities that even AWS affords, like AWS's application discovery service. If you've never used it before, oh my God. But other than that, those are some of my faves, but definitely the business critical applications.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good point. I think business critical is sometimes the area that some folks just assume need to happen and will happen smoothly. And that is probably the worst assumption to make, especially for business critical applications and functionality. Stephanie, did you want to add anything before we moved on?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, like, just from the perspective of things that I see, obviously we like, we were talking about the 7 R's, right? And migrations. And I've just found, like, just through, observing customer engagements, that like just general migrations and modernizations are sort of both necessary in order to realize the full benefits of the cloud. And you have to really, just going back to the point that Ebony was making, just do the due diligence around assessing sort of readiness to migrate to the cloud, and we work a lot with customers. We have like tools and programs available to really help customers assess their readiness, and then come up with a strategy that factors in both the business and technical needs, so the business outcomes and technical needs and such, and try to do things in a way that gets the customer where they're needing to go in the sort of most strategic path possible. But interestingly enough, I've had several conversations where folks will say they want to modernize before migrating, or they want to do all this extra stuff, but then realize that they kind of need to migrate first to be able to sort of get to the cloud and realize all the benefits, and then a lot of the more transformational sort of deep dive modernization type of engagement sort of happen after that. So there, you still do see a lot of just getting to the cloud first things first, and then sort of going from there, if you will.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think one of the interesting concepts that Jason mentioned was certainly around the culture, right? Like, as you're moving from on-premise data center into the cloud, there's a culture shift or a culture change that has to happen in order to really realize all of the benefits of the cloud. So I think those are all really good points. Thank you all for answering. Well, let's keep going. Let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity, because I love it. It's near and dear to my heart. So I'll pose the question, I'll let you all answer, and then I'll kind of just throw my 2 cents in there. But in terms of cloud adoption and cloud migration, like, what are some of the impacts that you've seen from a cybersecurity perspective at an organization? Like, what are some of the challenges, advantages? Just share some thoughts with the group.
Well, I can go first. It's very challenging, because when you're in the cloud, right, you're always looking at external threats, right? But there's also potentially internal threats. So if you don't have the ability to detect anomalies and get the necessary alert, it makes it extremely difficult to have awareness when you have a breach or nefarious activities within your system. So you really need to build a team that is an expert team, right? Because cybersecurity typically is not a best effort type of situation where you do the best that you can. It's that you really have to do the best almost at all times. I would say, a long time ago, I worked for a company, and there was a security breach, and the CEO was like, well, "What do we do?" And one of the first things he said is, "Go hire some experts." So we hired CrowdStrike. Not a lot of people, have the necessary expertise to deal with that, and so you kind of also have to supplement your own team, not just train them, but with external resources that can help you, assess the level of security that you have.
Absolutely, you spoke to my heart. Ebony, do you want to add your experience?
Yeah, I had to give that one some thought, because that's a tough question, right? But in all honesty, because it can go in different directions, but what I will echo much of the same, which is building a really strong team that, especially if you're considering or you're migrating from on-prem to the cloud, or you're considering a hybrid model, or you're moving straight to the public cloud, right? To a certain degree, you have to build a strong network, but definitely a strong internal team that understands security, architecture, and all of the associated dependencies that go with, where you're storing your data, where you're storing your applications. What I would also say is that it's really important especially if you're considering a cloud migration, to understand, where your resources lie too. Quite often in my experience, right, when I first started with my organization, they were considering moving to the cloud, right? There's a lot of false assumptions that people have about security, right? And so to a certain degree, I would say there are definitely some things that you should tune into and factor in and consider in your long-term, short-term and long-term strategy. But there are definitely false assumptions about the cloud that you will need to dispel as well, right? And knowing what your organizations and more specifically your team or your security team's responsibilities are, and knowing what you can rely on your cloud providers for, right? Because to a certain degree, one of the reasons why we sometimes move to the cloud is because, there are cloud providers that afford and can afford more security in a controlled structure in a way that we can't necessarily on premise. And I think one of the things that, I had to dispel at my organization is, to a certain degree, a lot of people are nervous about moving in the cloud because they are afraid to lose their autonomy and their control. And they don't realize all of what they gain by actually either migrating to the cloud or making the decision to go public versus private. And so I would definitely, one of my biggest takeaways is make sure that you really have a good handle on what your responsibilities are and what you should be looking at. And what your security team should be assessing on a consistent basis, not just when you're in implementation phase, and really know what you have on the other side in terms of your service providers.
All great points. The one word you use that sticks out to me is absolutely the responsibility portion, right? I think a lot of people, as you mentioned, a lot of assumptions that cloud equals secure. Sure, yes, but not necessarily by default, right? So when done right, the cloud can absolutely be more secure than traditional networks, traditional workloads. But at the end of the day, when you go to the cloud, you're not avoiding risk, you're transferring risk, right? What you're doing is transferring the risk that you have for a potential breach of your data center to a potential breach of a cloud service provider's data center. While the likelihood of that breach happening is probably a lot lower than it happening in your own data center, you still have to realize that there is still some level of risk. You mentioned another very important portion or fact rather, and that's the resourcing, right? So in the US right now, there's over 450,000 open cybersecurity positions. So what does that mean? That means that there's not enough people to secure all of the clouds that most people are running their workloads in, right? So as we start thinking about migrating to the cloud, what I really like to tell people and make sure they understand is this is a shared responsibility model, right? I'm responsible for the data that I manage, for the data that I house in AWS's system, in AWS's infrastructure rather, but AWS is responsible for the infrastructure, right? So they're two very different organizations, probably doing things very differently, but sharing the responsibility for security and management of that workload now that it's in the cloud, right? So you're responsible for your portion. You're expecting the cloud service provider does their portion, and it's great when you have cloud service providers like AWS. I've worked with AWS for more than 10 years now, and you can tell they've really built a product that the foundation truly is security, right? And going through and looking at a lot of their FedRAMP documentation, a lot of the SOC 2 reports that come out of other cloud service providers, you can tell, that you're looking at a product or you're working with a vendor that really does take your security seriously, as well as their responsibility for your security. So I'll get off of my security soapbox now. If anyone wants to add anything else.
Yeah, Safi, just to add to that, I would also just before we move on to the next question, I want to also say again, those false assumptions about the public cloud. I can't tell you, I feel like I hear one every day, right? Oh my God, our stuff is in the cloud. Everybody has access to it. Everybody can see it. We can control it, right? And dispelling those false assumptions and really knowing what you have and what you don't have, what you can control, what you can't control, right? And again, to a certain degree, not being afraid of what you can't control, but knowing that there's an infrastructure that's larger than just your organization that's at your disposal is super paramount.
Absolutely, right. And that's where that's the place for policies and compliance and regulations, right? Those are the things that as end customers and end users, folks rely on cloud service providers to be able to provide. And it's not. every cloud isn't created equally, right? So you got to really do your homework and figure out what is best for you, given the data that you're managing, your customers, location, all those things really play into how one would determine how to best implement compensating control for their security, whichever cloud model they're using. So I will move on to the next question. Kind of go back to how can businesses determine what the best model for them looks like, right? So between public, private, or hybrid cloud technologies. Shamarke, what are you all doing at Freddie Mac? And how did you all kind of figure out which path to go depending on a specific project that you were working on?
Well, it's where you start, right? For us, we have our own data centers, and so our starting point is we have services and business capabilities in our own data centers, and we want to migrate to the cloud. Right now, you can't do it in a big bang approach, or you say do it all at once. But the reality for us was that we have mainframes. We're very fairly old company. We're 50 years old, and so we have mainframes, and we have actually VMCs. Luckily, we had we've been leveraging VMC for such a long time. So lifting and shifting became so much easier for us. So that's where we started with some of our business capabilities, and we moved it to AWS Cloud, leveraging VMC technology. And then we're building out the infrastructure and additional business capabilities to enable our teams to build new capabilities or re-architect capabilities within AWS ecosystem. And part of our strategy really is also, leveraging best-in-class technology. So, that means for us, we're looking at vendors who provide certain capabilities. Like we're looking at graph databases across the board, and we're doing evaluations and scorecards. We're trying to bring in, the best-in-class, forward-looking technologies into Freddie Mac, so that we build a runway for people to innovate at Freddie Mac and try to get them to develop and deploy capabilities as quickly as possible. So that's the direction that we're taking in our strategy. We will still continue to have our on-prem capabilities. There is no time frame to take most of those out, decommission them, as you will. That is to be determined. But I think our focus is really how do we enable the future, and that's primarily building on cloud technologies, on SaaS services, and move towards that direction.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think a lot of people, they hear cloud and they want to instantly kind of like rush and put everything up there. But it sounds like you all over at Freddie Mac are doing a good job really taking your time and figuring out what works best for your organization given your current workload. So, Ebony, do you want to add something to that about your experience?
Yeah, and Safi, you kind of hit it on the nail. I think like sometimes where you either have an organization where like, oh yeah, your senior leadership team is like, throw everything in the cloud, right? They don't really understand what the scope of that is, or you'll have an organization that's so restricted and so nervous about moving to the cloud that it becomes a bit of a burden to just kind of get over that mentally, right? But there are, a few of us that live in the in-between, and I think for my organization, our senior leadership team was very much like, let's get everything in the cloud. This is where we're going now. Despite the fact that, to Shamarke's point, we have data centers on site too, right? And the vast majority of the applications that were built out and homegrown over the years were these secure Java applications that now we have like a plethora of, right? But, in all honesty, I feel like my organization has kind of backtracked a bit, right? So first, get everything in the cloud. Wait, no, actually, we should probably think about this. And maybe we want to go hybrid. But the truth is, and this is something that I really wanted to communicate to the BPTN community, which is most organizations think that they have to choose between public and private and that there can't be a middle ground, but there is, right? And choosing to coexist in both places, especially if your organization is not yet ready to give up a certain degree of autonomy is okay. And it really is more about like where you're at in that journey. And of course, I know a lot about AWS. So I think that AWS does a good job of communicating, in terms of the complexities, but also the ease of migrations that comes with like just understanding what's afforded to you and the knowledge there. And just to kind of share about, my experiences at my current organization. Because again, I've been a part of a lot of a lot of implementations. I'm going through a mainframe migration to the cloud right now. But when my organization first moved to the cloud or started moving to the cloud about 3.5 years ago, they didn't know what that meant, right? Like they were only focused on, again, those business critical applications. And they really didn't realize that they had terabytes of data that they had to migrate, or that we had like 10 subsystems that were basically processing data on a regular basis. And we had CSVs, pack files from city and state systems that were mostly on premise that we had to process, right? Like, and they didn't really unpack what that might have meant for a cloud migration. But the truth is, we're still going through it, but we decided not to move all of our transactional processes to the cloud because they accumulated a lot of data that wasn't necessarily business critical for our users. But in all honesty, what I really mean to tell you guys is that, you shouldn't force it. Really spend time justifying the strategy and debunking myths to arrive at a model that makes sense for your organization. And if your organization is not yet ready to cut over to, the public cloud, that's okay, right? Like, go through all of the considerations and really take your time to justify it and go through the proper analysis too, because TCO, ROI, total cost of ownership, return on investment are very real to sometimes a bottom line, but also to your senior leadership team. And until you actually know the total cost of ownership in the cloud, or the total cost of ownership of owning partial on-prem platforms and data and applications and the cloud, you won't really be able to effectively make a decision based on like data that So don't skip that. Take your time and really justify what you're doing.
Awesome. Those are great points. I think one of the things, I think one of the we can probably add some value to some of our listeners, maybe just giving some recommendations or advice in terms of, how, from your current role, how have you tried to help or, lead organization leaders or team leaders into the perspective of like heading towards a cloud migration, right? Like what are some ways you kind of help overcome some of the hurdles, or just advice that you give? Stephanie, maybe this is a good one for you to.
Well, just real quick, I was just, and I guess maybe this answers both questions, just to touch on a little bit around sort of when to consider hybrid cloud and so forth. And so one of the things that we've seen is that some customers want the benefits of the cloud, but they've got requirements for certain workloads, particularly those with like low latency requirement or like local data processing needs, where those workloads just can't move to the cloud because of the fact that, because of those sort of like factors. So you think about, an application that has to be super close to like a factory floor, right? Or like a telecom, sort of tower, right? Or an exchange, or, something of that nature. But, and so the sort of the needs of that particular workload can't go to the cloud, but the companies and customers still want to be able to, get the benefits and services that come with the cloud and connect to their data sets that are in the cloud. So that's where, AWS has created, functionality like Outpost, right, to sort of solve for that, where, you've got scenarios where customers, can still sort of function with the critical workloads that have to stay on premise, but still get the value and benefit of connecting to stuff that's already in the cloud as well, right? So I think so that just sort of, maybe that answers both questions in terms of like when to consider, I guess, a hybrid cloud environment, right? And what that looks like. And I think just in terms of just advice, it just goes back to just understanding the strategy for the organization, right? And what are the business outcomes that the companies or organizations are striving towards, and the technical requirements that sort of go along with getting the company where they're trying to go.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And so there's a few questions from the audience, and I wanted to get your take on this one, Stephanie, specifically. So what are some ways that you're kind of dispelling some of the false assumptions? I'm assuming, when you meet with potential customers, they have a list of reasons, there's someone in the room who is against the cloud, right? So what are some ways that you kind of help organizations overcome some of those hurdles?
Overcome some hurdles in terms of like just not wanting to move to the cloud in the first place. Yeah,
right,
well,
like
I would just say,
things.
yeah. So I think, Ebony and Shamarki touched on a lot of this, but for me, it really just comes down to having, just a good conversation to really understand like what's at the root of the concern and the root of like the objection that the customer has put forth, whether it's around security or whether it's around cost or what have you. And then from there, just sort of working backwards from what that concern is and trying to, to just sort of dive deep into it and provide the customer with like the data and additional sort of like resources and information and education to dispel whatever concern that they have, particularly if there's a piece of data that we can provide back that allows them to see, that perhaps there's another way of sort of thinking about things, if you will. So like I said, I really think it starts with the conversation and then working backwards from the concern as well as their intended outcomes and helping the customer like with the path towards getting where they're trying to go. One other thing I'll say real quick, and this goes back to the comment that I had made earlier, just leveraging programs like our assessments, right, that we do with customers sometimes, and through doing assessments to really, sort of assess and analyze the current portfolio, the customer's current environment, there might be information that they learn, that they didn't necessarily even know was out there about their environment through, sort of doing the readiness assessments and really trying to drive towards a total cost of ownership and potential sort of business case and ROI. And again, through those engagements, we're really able to show customers more about their environments that they may not even know that's out there, and then help come up with a strategy and a path forward that gets them where they're trying to go.
Wow, that's awesome. That was a question from the audience, but it was definitely a question that I had, in terms of like how you are able to help us as, potential cloud adopters. How can you help people overcome some of those challenges? So I think those are really great points. Thank you for adding those that input, Stephanie. So we have a few more minutes. So just going to kind of go to one of the last questions. I think a lot of people are interested to know, for someone who's looking to grow their career in cloud, is there some piece of advice, input that you can kind of add or share with them to kind of help them figure out what's the best way to stay current, right? Technology is changing almost every day. What are some ways that you stay current on technology, emerging trends, and what are some points of advice you can offer the group?
Is that for everyone or is that for me?
So I would like Stephanie to start, but then everyone.
Oh, okay. I'll be quick because I'm going to come from the perspective of like being a sales and business leader and so forth. So it'd be great to get Ebony and Shamarki's perspective as well, given that they are, practitioners in the space. But one thing I will say just overall is take advantage of like the training and enablement that's out there. Like AWS in particular has initiatives. I want to say it's to train 29 million, if I'm not mistaken, sort of new people on cloud services by, I won't quote the year because I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but nonetheless, and there's all types of like free cloud computing, courses and so forth that are available for people to take advantage of. So my point being is just, there's so much need, for people to get trained and skilled up and certified to be practitioners in the space. Safi, you brought up the great point around just the amount of roles that are out there for cybersecurity, right? So, just sort of, I guess, knowing what you might want to do, and then finding a path towards getting access to the training and certifications available to you to sort of help position you for various different roles is just a great place to start, particularly, if you're going down the more technical path.
Awesome. And I think I heard Io mentioned earlier, there are some recruiters in the audience. So, yeah. Shameless plug for AWS. You're welcome.
And leverage your network. And that's I'll just add that one point. That's such a huge thing, particularly for folks in this audience, like leveraging your network, connecting with people on LinkedIn, getting insight, reaching out to recruiters. I know AWS often has like events open to the public, for fireside chats or for, just engagements where you're interacting with recruiters and so forth. Take advantage of stuff like that, because when you either know people or can get insight from folks who are already within, various different companies that you might want to go to potentially, give you some thoughts on your resume or your experience, or pass it along to someone already in the company. That absolutely helps to get you the conversations needed to even, to take the first step of trying to get inside of some of these larger companies and so forth.
Awesome. All right, we have time for one more. So Ebony, do you want to go really quickly?
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to echo Stephanie. Honestly, you guys, just jump in, all right? I didn't even start in cloud computing in my career. I kind of fell into it, and it's because I had such a passion for it, but my background was in journalism, and I really, because of that, I understood communication and communicating with users in a way that was a little bit different than your normal developer. And so I really wanted to solve for pain, right? And that joy about fixing people's problems, because I truly am a problem solver, ended up being, an entire journey or professional journey for me. So the understanding of cloud-based technologies actually came later, and there's a plethora now, I think, of resources, both AWS and otherwise, that you can learn on the job, you can learn on your own time. And for me, I was an administrator that fell into becoming a manager, who fell into becoming a director. So there's really no right or wrong way to do it. But it's okay to fall into the space because you have a curiosity. In fact, I think a lot of you here are here because you have a curiosity and want to explore more or learn more, or take, what you've learned up a notch. Take a course, do an online lab. I started managing a cloud-based team here at my organization before I knew everything there is to know about the cloud. And so, I ended up going for my master's degree in cloud computing architecture, but that wasn't the first starting point. So again, just jump in, don't make assumptions, don't assume that you're going to fall into like a lack of understanding and get confused. Truly take the time to coach and teach yourself, but also learn at your own pace. We're in a different point in time in life now, and there's a lot of training resources online. And I think that by actually executing migrations, and that's the best way that I learn, like just kind of, behind the scenes at night, I would like go home and I'd learn how to do things on AWS or other systems. And then I'd come to work like I was the expert, Eventually I did end up becoming an expert, but again, like, don't be shy. Definitely build your network. I love seeing AWS recruiters here. And there's a lot of people out there. And to a certain degree, I will honestly say there's more cloud computing jobs than there are people with the skill. And there's a lot of people looking for you. So just start.
Awesome. Well, we are at time, a few minutes early, but basically from the panelists, never stop learning. Sounds like be a sponge, get training, get your network together. But so thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to our wonderful panelists today. This was awesome. I'm sure there's a lot of great stuff for the audience to take away from this talk tonight. It's been great. I've enjoyed myself moderating this panel. And I will hand it back over to Io to wrap us up.
Hey, fantastic, Sophie. Thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. I hope you were able to learn and gain something from just that great learning experience. There is a question here for the panelists, so I'm hoping if someone can just drop it in the chat. People are asking for where these training resources that were talked about, what websites can people go on to grab that? So I would say if you can, if any of the panelists or Sophie, if you can just drop that in the chat, in the community chat, so people can at least copy and paste that. And I want to say thank you so much to Stephanie. I want to say thank you to Ebony and Shamarka as well for sharing your expertise with us, for giving us some sound advice, for sharing your story with us. We really, really do appreciate it. Thank you for that fantastic lean-in conversation. I also want to thank our partners, AWS. So please, if everyone can just drop in the chat, thank you, AWS. Thank you very much for this opportunity for us to be able to learn through you and through people that are working within your organization. Hey, the recruiters are still here, by the way. If we can just pop up their names one more time, I don't know where that is in our slides. If we can pull up the names of the recruiters, add them on LinkedIn. Let them know that you are here, you are available, you are open to a conversation. let them go back saying, wow, they had an amazing experience with Black professionals. They are awesome. They are wonderful. That IO guy is so cool. Is so nice. So go on LinkedIn and look out for Adele Gonzalez, Michael Dixon, Michael Hoggard. You have some great opportunities to have some great conversations with them. Once again, thank you, Ebony. I believe Ebony has put the link in the chat for if you're looking to advance your learning around this area. Please, the music is going to be coming real soon. Remember to connect with BPTN on social media. Please, if you can put up our slide with the BPTN. Sorry, I'm putting the back-end team on the edge of their seats. I want to make sure that they're paying attention. Follow us on social media. On LinkedIn, we're Black Professionals in Tech Network. Just type that in your LinkedIn profile. You should be able to, it should pop up for you. We're also on social, on Twitter. There we go. On Twitter, we are BPTN. On Instagram and Facebook, we are BPTN. Our Slack channel is a great place to be. You know, recruiters come to Slack channel to tell you about jobs. They're like, come work for us. You know, so it's a great place to be able to meet some great people. So bptn.slack.com, and we're also on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. This is great. Please keep the conversation going. Go on LinkedIn, connect with others that have shared their LinkedIn profiles earlier on, and let's have a good networking session post this. Now over to the music and to the DJ. Thank you, Socrates, for cueing that in. It's been a great pleasure. My name is Ayo Owaduni. Have a great evening.